What's up YouTube and welcome to a new video. Now when it comes to values and Porsches, everyone knows that GT products tend to have a very low depreciation rate. They are then also frequently best in class and have a high desirability factor. Now with a booming used car market following an increase in demand and a decrease in supply, I think that you can already guess what happened to GT3 RS prices during last year. However, as I will show you soon, a Porsche GT product is not always the best place for your money. But before we have a look at all of that, let's first have a look at today's GT3 RS market. Over here we have the US market with the model year on the horizontal axis and the price on the vertical axis. Each dot represents a car for sale, and you can see that we only have GT3 RSs from model year 2016 and 2019. These are of course the 991.1 and the 991.2 cars. And the .2 of course features a revised engine and some other improvements. And you can see that this is valued by the market. The .2 will cost you around $50,000 extra, and that's a serious premium. Yet, there is some overlap between the markets. A low mileage high spec .1 is priced the same as a modestly spec .2 with a relatively high mileage. The price variation is then also large in both markets, but it is the largest in the .2 market. And this partially results from the introduction of the weissach package. So let's identify those cars. Now this package makes the car even lighter, and if you also added the magnesium wheels to it, the package could add another $31,000 to the price. And this is also reflected in the used car prices, as the ones with the weissach package go for a premium of $23,000. Low mileage examples with high specs even have prices of well over $300,000. And those prices are pretty steep if you ask me. Yet, most of these cars are then also almost brand new. The .1 cars tend to have a mileage of around 5.2 thousand miles, while this is 4,500 miles for the 991.2s. And that of course means that these cars are hardly driven. The .1s are now almost 5 years old, and this in turn helps with the strong residuals. So after all of those numbers, I think that we have a pretty good idea as to how today's GT3 RS market looks. And that also means that it is time to have a look at the price changes. Last year, I already had a look at this market, and I concluded that once the initial price fluctuations were settled, values for these cars would be very strong. I even included the rather bold "own for free" sentence in the thumbnail. But could you have owned this car for free? The answer to this question is of course yes, but that's not a big surprise. It goes for almost every car in today's market. Let's have a look now at that price increase with the following graph. Over here we have now the date on the horizontal axis and the price on the vertical axis. And you can see that the line slopes upwards. And that means that prices went up. They increased with $40,000 or 20%. In May 2020, the median price for a GT3 RS was $200,000, and now it sits at $240,000. This price increase is then also statistically confirmed, and this means that it is unlikely to be the result of chance. Hence, the result what you see here is a good result. And I will show you later in the video how this increase compares to some other cars. Now when we look under the surface of the market at the market characteristics, then we can see that the changes are a bit different from other markets. We can see that supply decreased with 15% from 106 to 90 cars. So yes, supply decreased, but not as strong as you might have expected. In some markets we could see a decrease of more than 50%. Besides that, we can see that there's a large mileage increase in the market. The median mileage more than doubled in 1 year time. Yet, as I mentioned before, the median mileage is still low. But keep this in the back of your mind. This mileage increase is namely caused by the 991.2 market. Now, while I was investigating this change in mileage, I also saw that the price increase was carried across the market. Have a look at the following graph. Over here you can see now the date on the horizontal axis and the price on the vertical axis. And you can also see that each line represents now a different mileage bucket. For example, the blue line at the top shows the price increase for cars with a mileage between 0 and 471 miles. And we can see that this increase is with $25,000, clearly less than for the other cars. So this means that cars with an extremely low mileage saw a smaller price increase than the rest of the market. And again, I would like to ask you to park this in the back of your mind. We will come back to this when we have a look at the depreciation per 1,000 miles driven. Alright, we know now that prices increased, but this is by no means a surprise. It would have been stranger if they would have decreased. Yet, one thing which we still need to check is if the price increase is perhaps coming from a certain market segment. To be more precise, we need to find out if there's a difference in the price increase for the .1 and .2 cars, and for the cars which have the weissach package and the cars which don't have this package. And that's what we will have a look at now. But before we do so, I would like to ask you to support this channel by smashing that like button. Thank you. Alright, but now, did the .2 cars go up more than the .1 cars? Let's have a look. Over here we have now the .1s in orange and the .2s in blue. And you can see that the lines increase parallel to each other. Hence, the price increases are almost identical. 991.1s increased from $165,000 to $210,000, and this means an increase of $44,500 or 27%. .2 cars increased from $211,000 to $260,000, and this means an increase of $49,000 or 23%. So that's a bit less than the .1s, but there's a very good reason for this. If we look at the market characteristics with the following plot, then we can see that supply decreased slightly more for the .2s, but also that the mileage increase is significantly higher. In the .2 market, the median mileage increased from 845 to 4,500 miles. And this of course means that the market moved from one which contained many cars which were basically brand new, to one which contained many cars which are almost brand new. And this mileage increase of course dampened the price increase. So what about the .2 cars then? With and without the weissach package, is there a difference in the price increase between them? Let's have a look. Over here we have in blue the ones with the weissach package and in orange the ones without. And we can see that the relative price increases are almost identical. The cars with the package went up with 25%, while this was 23% for the cars without the package. So the presence of this package doesn't seem to affect the price increase. Moreover, not many things seem to affect the price increase. Prices went up in all market segments. Let it be slightly more in the .1 than in the .2 market. But like I already showed you, this has to do with the mileage increase. Let me also show this visually. Over here we have the depreciation per 1000 miles graphs for the .2 and the .1s. Now if we look first at the .2s, then we can see that the orange line, so the one for July 2021, lays above the blue one, the one from May 2020. After all, we just saw that prices went up. However, we can see that the market in May 2020 consisted out of many cars with an extremely low mileage. Today's market lays much more towards the right hand side on the mileage axis. Yet, prices are still clearly higher, especially for the cars over 2,500 miles. Contrasting to this are the low mileage cars at the top end of the market. They saw a much smaller price increase. Prices over there were perhaps already a bit stretched. Note also how different the 991.1 graph is to the 991.2 graph. On the left we can clearly see a parallel shift of the curve, which is more or less the same for all mileages. Hence, the mileage had very little effect on the price increase. Now if we look then at the slopes of the curves, then we can see that both cars lose around $2,300 per 1000 miles driven, and this is a normal score for a car in this segment. Alright, by now we clearly confirmed that in the full GT3 RS market prices went up. They increased with $20,000 or 40%. Yet, like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, GT products and especially RSs are known for their strong residuals. It is not uncommon to see a value increase for those cars. Unfortunately though, the GTs and especially the GT3 RSs come at a hefty price, around $165,000. For most of us, these cars and the corresponding value developments are then also out of reach. That is the bad news, but there's also good news. You don't need to spend $165,000 to get the same return as what you get on a GT3 RS. Moreover, cheaper models even increased more than a GT3 RS. Let's have a look. Over here we have from top to bottom the .2 and .1 GT3 RS, the .2 and .1 991 Carreras, the .2 and .1 997 Carreras, and the .2 and .1 996 Carreras. Now I know that there are a lot of lines, but please stay with me here. When we look at the price developments of all the 911s in this graph, we can see that almost all of them went up in price. An exception to this is the 991 market, but the last observation is then also from December 2020. They simply need an update. Yet, when we look at the magnitude of the increase, then the 997s and especially the 996s outperformed the GT3 RSs. 997.1s went up with 35% and .2s with 22%. And for the 996s, this is 38 for the .1 and 36% for the .2. So in this case, the cheapest 911, the 996, outperformed all of them. The 996s were then also unpopular for a long time, and perhaps even a bit undervalued. Moreover, in combination with an increase in disposable income, this perhaps ensured that the 996s were within budget for many, causing an increase in demand and hence prices. Now for all of the 911s what you see in this graph, I have separate full depreciation analysis on my channel, so check them out if you're interested in one of those. I will also put the links to those videos down below in the description of this video. Alright, so compared to some other 911s, the price increase in the 911 GT3 RS market is actually quite modest. But what happens when you compare that price increase to some of its competitors? Let's have a look. After that, it is by the way time to wrap up and conclude. Over here we have the price development for the 720S, 488, GT3 RS and AMG GTR market. Now in all of these markets prices increased. If we start at the top, then we can see that the 720S increased significantly during 2020. These cars didn't also take a major hit when they were released, so perhaps a recovery was justified. Prices increased with 28% and since then they came down again with 7%. However, in total, this still means an increase of 19% between May 2020 and May 2021. And this in turn is similar to the price increase in the 488 market, which saw an increase of 14%. However, we know now that the price increase in the GT3 RS market tops the latter two. This one namely sits at 20%. Moreover, it is also a lot higher than what we saw in the AMG GTR market. That market increased by 14% between March 2020 and May 2021. So compared to these competitors, the GT3 RS just comes out on top. But honestly, did we expect anything else from a GT3 RS? And with that, let's wrap up and conclude. GT3 RS prices increased significantly during last year. But like we said many times, this is not really a surprise as almost all cars did. Moreover, we saw that the price increase in the 996 and 997 markets was actually larger than the one in the 991 GT3 RS market. Yet, we also just saw that compared to some of its competitors, the GT3 RS came out on top. Now looking forward, we can't ignore that the new GT3 RS will be released soon, and this might increase market supply for the current generation and push prices down. But this is of course mere speculation. And with that we also arrive at the end of this video. Now if you like this data-driven way of analyzing car markets, but would have liked to see the analysis for a different car, let me know down in the comment section for which car you would like to see an analysis. Once there are enough requests for a certain car, I will make a video about it. Also don't forget to subscribe and click on the notification bell so you get actually notified when your requested analysis goes live. As always, thank you for watching and I hope to see you next week for a new video.